Hi, it's Jeremy, the Zoo Nerd. This will be our first of hopefully many live critter chats. And I'm coming to you live from the rooftop of Zoo Nerd Studios in cloudy Woodland Hills, California. So today we're going to talk a little bit about bears. I'm very excited to share that with you. But before we get started talking about bears, I just want to tell you a little bit more about what I hope this site can be and how this site can work. First of all, who I am. I've been an animal care professional for 14 years. During that time, I've worked at 3 different zoos and an aquarium. I am currently employed by an aquarium in the education department. And what that means is I am considered non-essential staff. So during this time, here in the state of California, that means I am safer at home. So these chats are going to be fun. I'm going to have some good information, but they're all going to be filmed from my house because I am safer at home. So I hope you can enjoy what I have to share. I have a lot of experience interacting with the animals I am going to be talking about and sharing some things. Each episode I will also put some supplemental material up on the profiles on Instagram and Facebook to kind of help get things going, or also to follow up after we're done chatting. So that's who I am. That's what I hope to do. So feel free to have, if you have comments or questions, add those in, and I'll get to those after the chats are over. So first of all, we're going to talk a little bit about bears. Bears are a mammal. I have some earlier videos that are kind of background content on the Facebook and the Instagram and the YouTube channels. I encourage you to watch those if you're not sure what makes a mammal, or a bird, reptile a reptile, all those good things. That information is on the profiles already. I can also do a live chat about that if there's the interest. But speaking specifically about bears today, there are 8 species of bears around the world, and I'm going to talk about each of them a little bit. Before we get doing that, I'm going to tell you a story that I have from my journeys. I was in Kenya in 2010. That's a country in Africa, if you may not know. And during that time, we met with local school groups to kind of talk about our experiences and their experiences, and the wildlife conservation place I was visiting does a lot of really great community work. And so they had us meet the kids because our visit to Africa actually helps pay for their school. And that's a really great program. But in talking with these kids, they wanted to know about our animals because they're somewhat familiar with theirs. They had recently gone on a safari and seen a lot of their local wild animals. They wanted to know a little bit more about the animals where we come from. And this girl asked me, what's the biggest animal in North America, in the United States, where I'm from? And I answered that the biggest would be a bison. And she asked what that was like, and I explained it was similar-ish to their buffalo that they have there, although they're a little hairier and a little different shape, but kind of cranky. You want to give them some space. She said, no, what's the biggest animal there that could eat you? And in Africa, that's a common threat. They're concerned about what might eat them. I said, in America, that's a bear. And she's like, what is a bear? Because see, they don't have bears in Africa. And this school group didn't know anything about a bear. So I talked to her a little bit about bears and a bit what a bear looks like, how a bear moves. And then she said, I have a question. Is a bear fat like all Americans? And I said, yes, they are. So that's kind of our jumping off point to talk about bears today. But I'm going to talk about each species of bears. I included some graphics from our good friends at Peppermint Narwhal on the profile pages on Facebook and Instagram. So check those out to see kind of what we're talking about, and I'll include some photos later of each species. But to start off with, most of us, I assume, are in the United States. We may have some international guests joining us, but we're going to talk a little bit about the North America bears first. And we'll start with what's most common, and that is the North American black bear. They are actually the most common bear in the world. They also have a very large home range. They stretch from about Alaska throughout most of Western Canada, throughout some of the forests of Eastern Canada, and throughout the forest of the Eastern US, and throughout much of the Western states. The only places they're not really in the US is in the middle states, the plains. North American black bears can be about 400 pounds for a big male, which is pretty good size. Females would be a bit smaller. I uploaded a video earlier today on the Instagram page. It will follow on the Facebook and the YouTube of my experience watching a mother black bear and her cubs in Sequoia National Park that I saw when I visited there a few years ago. But North American black bears are amazing creatures. In my time when I was a zookeeper at the Los Angeles Zoo, I had the privilege of taking care of a black bear that is there. His name is Ranger. One thing I really loved about Ranger is he was very cranky if you were slow to get him his food. And I think that's pretty typical of most bears. They love to eat, and I don't blame them. I like to eat too. But bears are very excited about their food, and they will do a lot of things to protect their food. They also have excellent sense of smell, really good vision, really good hearing. But their sense of smell is how most bears are able to find their food, which is pretty great. Moving on to our next species of bear, we're going to talk about brown bears. Now, sometimes those are called grizzly bears, and grizzly bears and brown bears, spoiler alert, they are the same thing. A grizzly bear is technically a subspecies of the brown bear, but grizzly bears are brown bears. Brown bears are sometimes grizzly bears. There's also brown bears that live in other places like Europe and Asia, as well as the ones that are here in the North America. Now, the brown bears in North America are pretty limited in the lower 48 states. They kind of exist only in Wyoming, Idaho, Montana, and Washington. And then they're quite common in Western Canada and quite common in Alaska. And the brown bear on record is actually, oh, sorry, we had a little technical blurb there with the connection. Fun times. But the brown bears are the biggest of all bears. The bears up in Alaska that are sometimes called Kodiak bears actually get bigger than the guy that most people think is the biggest bear, and that is the polar bear. Polar bears are huge, don't get me wrong. But some brown bears, especially those Kodiak bears and those bears that eat a lot of fish up in Alaska, they get bigger than the polar bears do. Talking about polar bears are a little different in the other bears. Most bears are omnivores. That means they eat plants and animals. Polar bears, not the case. They pretty much eat just other animals. They are a true carnivore, and they are an excellent hunter. They're also very threatened with our current climate changes that are going on. As sea ice melts, that limits a lot of their hunting grounds. When the summertime comes and all that sea ice melts, polar bears basically are fasting or not eating during a lot of that time because they have a lot harder time finding their food. They like to eat things like seals, and that's a lot harder for them to hunt if they don't have the sea ice. So those are our three North American bears: black bears, brown bears, and polar bears. Now, both the brown bears and the polar bears also live in other places besides just North America. They also live in the tops of the other countries in the northern hemisphere. So that would be, polar bears would live across the Arctic countries, some in Russia, some in like Norway and Finland, and definitely in Canada. Brown bears would be a little further south than all of those. There are definitely brown bears in Europe, through a lot of parts of the mountainous area of Northern Asia, and of course here in North America. Next, we're going to talk a little bit about one of my favorite bears, because it's a little quirky and a little different, and that's called the Andean bear. And Andean bears, they live in South America. I first became very familiar with Andean bears when I worked at the Phoenix Zoo in Phoenix, Arizona. And Andean bears are one of their featured animals there. They have a really great exhibit. And during my time there, they also had a cub born, which was pretty remarkable. They don't have babies too often in human care. But the Andean bears are really cool, and they're quite different than a lot of other bears. they feel that Andean bears are some of the oldest genetically, splitting off the rest of the bear family tree. They're also one of the few bears that live south of the equator. The Andean bears in South America, and then the other bear that's south of the equator would be the sun bears over in Asia. Sun bears are awesome. They're the smallest bears, with adults weighing typically around 100 pounds. Sun bears are threatened with being endangered because their forest home is chopped down to make a lot of things that we use, like wood and paper. And of course, here in the US, we know that we're going through paper, especially that kind for the toilet, really quick. And that's decimating some of those forests around the globe. But other Asian bears, Asia has a lot of bears. They have a bear called the Asiatic black bear. And the Asiatic black bear is quite similar to our North American black bear. In fact, they're actually quite closely related. And they look very similar, although Asiatic black bears typically have a patch of white right here under their neck. They're really cool bears. I have seen all species of bears in a zoo environment, and I have luckily been able to see both black bears and brown bears out in their natural environment when visiting national parks. Next, I want to talk about a really cool and exciting bear called a sloth bear. Sloth bears, if any of you have ever seen the movie The Jungle Book, which takes place in India, sloth bears would be the bear that Baloo is based on. And although Disney took a lot of creative licensing in the way they drew Baloo, they did a decent job. Sloth bears are super hairy. They have really long hair, really big ears, and they do something kind of unique to their species. Well, they do several things unique to their species, but one is that their moms, when the cubs are little, the cubs actually ride on the mom's back, and they're the only bear that really does that, and it's really cute. I had the great opportunity to meet a sloth bear up close and personal because I have a friend who's a zookeeper at the San Diego Zoo, and she was able to take me behind the scenes and meet a very special sloth bear that lived there named Ken. And Ken was awesome. One thing I really loved about Ken is he had these huge lips, as all sloth bears do. And those lips are really wiggly, and they're able to form a vacuum. And they use those to suck bugs and grubs out of different rotting trees. That's one of the biggest things that they love to eat. And we were able to see that when we met Ken. The zookeepers were putting some food down a tube, and Ken would make his lips go around the end of the tube, and he'd suck the food out. And it's a really great experience. But sloth bears are really cool bears. I'll see if I can find a video of them and upload that onto the profile pages. And that brings us to the last bear, which is the panda. Pandas, over their recent history, have kind of been back and forth with scientists as to are they a bear or are they not a bear. And a big reason for that is because the pandas are true vegetarians. They don't really eat any other form of meat, and so that's pretty unique to them. They eat this stuff, like what's right here behind me. This is the bamboo that grows in my yard, but that is what pandas love to eat. So much so that that's pretty much the only thing that they eat is bamboo. And pandas, of course, were very endangered for a really long time. But there's some great news about that, and that is that their endangered status has recently been upgraded from endangered to threatened. And that's because of some really great work that has been happening in China, and also a series of zoos around the globe that have done a lot with panda research and panda breeding. Our zoos here in the US contributed a lot to that, particularly San Diego, Zoo Atlanta, the National Zoo in DC, and the Memphis Zoo. Those are the zoos that have traditionally had pandas here in the US, and they've done a lot to help out those populations. I also had a chance to meet a panda up close and personal at the San Diego Zoo when they still had pandas, and it was one of the true highlights of things that I've seen in a zoo setting. Pandas are really cool bears. They're a little bit sluggish sometimes. They definitely love their food like other bears, but very cute, very adorable. So that's a bit about bears. If you have any comments or questions about bears, feel free to put those in the comments on this video, and I will try to get back to them. I'm trying to be a resource for people to learn about animals. Obviously, I'm broadcasting from my home. I don't have those animals with me, but I can post videos and photos of those bears. There will also be some information coming up on our profiles on Facebook, Instagram, and later YouTube. I'll try to post this video there so it can stay there long term. One other question that I sometimes get asked about bears is, are koalas bears? That's a common question, and I'm gonna tell you right here, right now, koalas are not bears. Koalas are a marsupial, so their closest relative is a critter named the wombat, and we'll talk about both those on another episode. So I'm having a question right now coming through: what animals are similar to bears? Well, bears are in the family of animals called carnivores. So their closest relatives are going to be other carnivores. I don't know specifically what is the closest, but it's going to be things like the cat family, the dog family, the hyena family, possibly like the seals, the sea lions, and the mustelids. So things like weasels, badgers, those kind of things. But nothing's real close related to bears. Someone else is asking, what about grizzlies? Grizzlies are brown bears. We talked about those already, but feel free to review, watch this video again, and catch that. But grizzlies are a type of brown bear. All right. Oh, what's my favorite bear? My favorite bear is whatever bear I'm seeing at the time. I love bears. Hey, thanks for joining us today. I hope you've learned something. I hope you've had some fun. And I hope you share our page on Instagram or Facebook and like and subscribe. Thank you. Enjoy.